This is Officer Safety, and my name is Eduardo.
I'm David.
I'm Brian.
And I'm Maverick.
All right, so when booking an inmate, correctional officers have to go through a process. Correctional officers check the inmate's paperwork before processing to ensure that they have the right person. Once they determine everything checks out, they go ahead and check for contraband, cell phones, weapons, or any illegal item. Then the correction officers collect the inmates' personal items. Then they process the inmates by collecting their fingerprints, photos, and putting it into a file. And finally, correctional officers take the inmates to their cells. Correctional officer tactics. Some of these tactics are used for military training or officer training. Correctional officers have to be mentally and physically prepared for any situation. Correctional officers are trained to defend themselves and use less lethal force and lethal force if it's necessary in certain situations. If inmates do not comply, correctional officers will go as a team to de-escalate the situation, and on-duty officers may carry guns like shotguns and rifles. Correctional officers may carry sidearms while escorting prisoners outside the facility, court, hospital visits. Some of the gear that correctional officers use are vests, handcuff, electric stun gun, gas mask, beanbag, pepper spray, a nightstick, batons, rifles, shotguns, and handguns. Some of the procedures and facilities inside the facility, inmates have policies they must follow. Correctional officers have to be strict with inmates because they are dealing with aggression. Inmates who may also have mental health issues. Correctional officers are responsible for the safety of their coworkers and the inmates. Correctional officers search inmates' cell phones for contraband, weapons, phones, and other illegal items that shouldn't have in their cell.
So I'm gonna be speaking on officer safety back then. For a relationship between prisoners and guards was brutal. The relationship between prisoners and guards in early 20th century were brutal in some ways, yet elements of trust were also ingrained in the prison society. Colorado penitentiaries were hailed nationally for the implementation of the honor system in prison labor camps, in which several trusty inmates would be appointed to supervise industrial operations alongside guards. For the honor system in the 1920s, the honor system is a trustee system whereby certain of the inmates, through a recognition of their good behavior or their superior intelligence, or for other less commendable reasons, are designated by the superintendent to carry out his instructions and occupy positions of trust and responsibility in the management of the institution. The honor system was a key feature of industrial enterprises within Canton City's prisons for many decades. Unfortunately, an incident in 1976 brought about the swift termination of the practice. A trustee inmate raped and murdered a prison guard's family while staying at their ranch in a work release program. Despite the tragic circumstances surrounding the ensuing discontinuation of the honor system, however, its success in Colorado prisons in the early 1900s had provided a long-standing pattern for supporting the rehabilitation of prisoners, laying the foundation for future theories regarding reform. Correction officers taught guards, now frequently called correction officers, were increasingly taught to treat inmates with respect and shy away from the use of force unless absolutely necessary. As for officer safety now, the fact that is that today's inmates are more violent than they were 10 years ago. Uh, Guards instructed to strike prisoners only with nightsticks. The Society of Captives, Bishop Sykes notes that guards in the New Jersey penitentiary in this decade were instructed to strike prisoners only with nightsticks as opposed to their bare hands. The rationale being that threat or higher stakes violence would encourage inmates and guards alike to seek alternative methods of confrontation. Increasingly nuanced training for corrections officers, emphasis on rehabilitative role, and new respect for inmate rights all contributed to a greater movement to professionalize the corrections career that would be soon take hold of Cannon City's prisons. And progressive officer safety programs, there's multiple. They promote sound operational practices, review lessons learned, implement and practice best practices in the workplace, review operational practices to improve workplace safety, design and build new institutions, implement new technologies, and safety action plans.
I will be speaking on officer safety statistics. From 1992 to 1996, there were approximately 216 non-fatal incidents for every 1,000 officers. Study by the National Institute of Justice found that inmate to staff violence results in 2,000 correctional staff members' injuries annually. Data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics indicate that from 1999 to 2008, there were 113 occupational fatalities among civilians. Correctional officers, a fatality rate of 2.7 per 100,000 full-time employees. Of these deaths, 40% were intentional fatalities. More than half of correctional officers report that violent incidents are a regular occurrence at the prison where they work. Almost 30% are reported being seriously injured at work, and 85% are reported being someone seriously injured or killed. 1 in 3 have experienced at least one symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder. Moreover, 40% of officers report that they have experienced an event so frightening, horrible, or upsetting at work that they have had nightmares about it.
So I'll be talking about officer experiences. Pete Nelson is a retired correctional officer. He's experienced various sorts of assault and harassment. He's been stabbed 3 times and he's had 4 of his bones broken by inmates in the assaults. Inmates have attacked him with fecal matter, urine, makeshift weapons, and anything that they can get their hands on. He's witnessed officers in his facility been taken hostage, assaulted, and even killed. Yeah, he has multiple nightmares at night and flashbacks from experiences in prison. So another officer that was in correctional was Shane Bauer. He was a corrections officer in the Wynn Correctional Center in Louisiana. He experienced verbal abuse from inmates, such as name calling to death threats. They threatened to kill his family if he didn't. It pretty much blackmailed him. If he didn't get him things, they would threaten to kill him. He was assaulted by an inmate who used a toothbrush to try to stab him. Other correctional officers he worked with told him that if there's a fight between inmates, do not break it up for his own safety. And what matters is that he goes home alive. They don't care about the inmates because they want to protect themselves first. He's also saved 2 inmates from suicide by cutting the rope that they used. This will definitely give you mental trauma. It scarred him. And then he explains that he has trauma from the experiences in prison and wants to see improvements for safety of correction officers. Officers, I went through and watched interviews of officers who want to see changes in the jails. They want to see better working conditions, such as staffing numbers, because they're severely understaffed. In California alone, it's roughly 6 inmates to 1 guard, which is nowhere near enough. This puts the guard in a lot of danger. They want to see better equipment in a lot of prisons because most prisons still have equipment in use from the 60s and 70s when they were built. So they're out of date, and the technology they have isn't suffice enough to protect them. They also want to see canine units established in prisons to help sniff out contraband and also to help stop aggressive inmates who attack officers. And these are the resources we used.